ago, in May 2013, I was heading for my studio in the evening, and I did a silly thing. I went out of a door that I don't normally go out in my house without turning the lights on into the garden. I was heading for my studio, and I could see that there were solar lights going down the pathway, and I just headed for those without looking where my feet were going. And I tripped over an anvil, which was on the patio. I came down heavily on my right side, and I knew instantly I had actually done some real damage. Fortunately, my husband was home. I screamed out for him. He came running out, and I said, look, I've seriously hurt myself this time. At which point it started to rain, and he realised he couldn't leave me out there in pouring rain, so we had to he dragged, I shuffled, and we got me with great pain back into the bedroom that I had left from. And when I got in, I could only make it just inside the door, which was between the door and the side of the bed, which was just a bit wider than me. And then I had to lay there while he ran for the ambulance, to ring an ambulance. The ambulance came very quickly, and they were absolutely fantastic. There was a woman who seemed to be the person who was in charge of the situation, and she was very, very gentle and very concerned about me, and they gave me, I presume it was morphine, and I think they gave me a couple of different shots of that, and they realised that it was going to be, that I was in a lot of pain. And they said, look, to get you out of the position you're in, we're going to have to get another crew out to come and help lift you. With difficulty, they lifted me up, and they said to me, we can't give you any more painkillers, you're just going to have to yell. So yell I did. Anyway, they were all very concerned, very, very considerate, and really good. And once they'd got me all wrapped up in the ambulance and everything, of course it was only when I moved that the pain actually affected me. So I was taken into the hospital, and as usual in emergency, it's a long wait before you get to be seen. Pretty unnerving place, emergency. Anyway, eventually I was seen, and I was sent off for an X-ray. And the indication was that I hadn't actually fractured anything and I could go home. Well, I knew I'd done something disastrous, and there was a nurse who also was pretty sure of what I'd done. But the young doctor said, no, they thought I was fine. Anyway, it was obvious I wasn't, and eventually they said I could stay overnight. They kept me in overnight. The following day, whoever the doctor superior was also looked at the x-rays, and they realised I had fractured a epidurally. So then it was a matter of, I think I was in emergency for 2 or 3 nights because there wasn't a bed, and eventually a bed was found for me on the general med ward. And I was moved up there. Every time I moved, it was really painful. So it was one of those things where there was nothing they could do apart from give me painkillers and all those other things that accompany that. But I actually, there was no operation necessary or anything they could do about it. It was really bed rest and just, I guess, the hip doing its own thing. So for probably close to 2 weeks, I was in the hospital. For most of it, I couldn't do anything other than lie down. And I was doing the things with, having the bedpan and all that sort of stuff. I couldn't have showers, all that stuff that really, when you're not feeling well, doesn't help you feel much better. Anyway, eventually it got to the point where the physios came to visit, and I think there were 2 physios and an OT came to get me out of bed, and of course that was very traumatic the first couple of times. And I had a very good physio and I had a friend there who has done a lot of exercise. She's a very healthy tennis player, and she's done a lot of exercise. She was there as my cheerperson for that first stepping out of bed, or first sliding out of bed, I should say. And they literally wanted me to stand up for the first couple of times, and it was excruciating. The incredible thing I think about the whole experience was that I suddenly felt like an old lady, and I had visitors from aged care and all kinds of strange things. And I think, what are they coming to me for? I'm not one of those people. So that was a bit of a shock, and it made me very conscious of my age and my mortality. They recommended that I went across to rehab at Camden, so I acknowledged that, and I was put into an ambulance, or patient transfer ambulance. And there was a really lovely couple, the driver and the nurse was wonderful, and she got me all strapped in with my blue cross straps on me to keep me safe in my on my stretcher. And she said to me, have you got a mobile phone with a camera on it? And I said, yeah, I do have. And she said, oh, I've got to take a photo of you. It's so abstract. So I laughed because she was, talking my kind of language. So she took a photograph of me, or a few photographs of me, which became part of my resource material for my small paintings that eventually went into the cabinet pubic rami that I made as a result of the whole experience. When I got into rehab, it was a very different sort of atmosphere. It was a much happier place to be. Most people were aiming to get out of the hospital, and they had sufficient support around them to encourage them to have physio, to do more exercises, and to actually think ahead, think forward. During that time, I was well enough to start making some work, and people were quite interested in the fact that I was an artist, and I was obviously going to make something about it. They didn't mind me drawing them, so some of them would sit there, and I was able to draw one woman in her wheelchair, another couple in their beds, and so on. I think I was there for nearly 2 weeks in rehab, and towards the end of the time, they'd said that an occupational therapist would go home with me and check out my space, make sure I was going to be safe when I went home, and that I would be able to go home the day after she had done that. So it was really good. By then, my husband knew that I was going to need some of those, things that we don't like to have to use, like an over-the-toilet seat frame, a cushion to sit on, one of those air cushions to sit on. I'd need some grab rails put up in a shower chair and a few other little aids like that. The occupational therapist was wonderful, and she went through the studio and indicated things that might be a problem. In the house, she did the same thing. Watch those cords, you could catch your foot on them. All those very sensible things that we should all know about, but we kind of live with them and think, oh, well, I know it's there, I'm not going to trip on it, and so on. Anyway, so I was back on the day I got home. A friend, another occupational therapist, ironically, who was a friend of mine, was kind enough to pick me up because my husband was working. And I was home, and it was such a relief. I realised how traumatising something like that is. It really throws your whole life, and not only yours, but your partner's or your children's or your friends' lives. They've got this other thing to consider, and obviously you feel really sorry for yourself, but you realise how other people are fitting in all this engagement and trying to support you. And I had a great group of friends who were running in and looking after me. I had daughters who were running in and shopping for me. I had a son who was putting films on my tablet for me to watch. So there were, there's all this wonderful support network around me. I was very lucky. Although it was a traumatic and somewhat sad experience, it resulted in something that was very positive. It made or encouraged me to make another artwork about the experience, and that's something that I generally do. It wasn't a way that I'd recommend people go and get their ideas for a new artwork, but I did try and turn it into a positive and end up with the story of the work. So I also did then go on to make a small blurb book online about the work, using the images to accompany the actual text, which was the story of the fall.